Good morning, and thanks for joining us here this morning on Treasure Coast Solutions. Every Wednesday from 9 to 10 o'clock, we talk about some of the things that are going on in the world and some of the changes that are happening, some of the things that might be impacting you in your daily lives, some of the things that are happening nationally and internationally, or are making a difference in what's happening and can affect you here in little old Stewart. So my name is Mark Brechbill. I'm a CPA and also an ex-banker, so I've had an opportunity to deal in finance most of my life. I did, I just want to mention that it's been an interesting period of time trying to do that, and this year our firm is celebrating its 25th anniversary here in Stewart, being in business. So I'm kind of excited about that, serving the local people here, and that's it's interesting because it's kind of exciting to be able to be in a position where you get to make a difference, you get to help people, and that's what this show is about, and it's also what I'm about in terms of trying to help people with their businesses, with their business planning, with their business transitions, and all of those kind of things that happen, and so it's kind of it's been kind of fun. It's a rewarding thing to do that, and it's hard for me to believe that it's actually been 25 years that I've been doing that, and had my own firm. So it's kind of exciting, and I wanted to just kind of mention I appreciate all of those of you out there that have given me that opportunity to work with you or some of your friends, both business and individual, because we do both. And I know I appreciate that trust that you have. So I just wanted to mention that. But as far as the show goes, like I said, we've been doing this show for a while, and every Wednesday from 9 to 10, except the last Wednesday of the month, which we typically have somebody from United weigh in talking about some of the nonprofit things that are happening in the community. And that's frankly a very important show for us because any business, any person, I think, but any business in particular that's not giving something back to the community for what they're getting from the community, then they're not being fair. And I think it's important to do that, and it's something that hopefully you as an individual or a business person will look for those opportunities too, because they seem to come back to you in multiple benefits. I've never been disappointed with ever participating. Some of those benefits aren't always monetary, and that's not important. There's some other benefits that you get out of it. Sometimes just helping somebody behind the scenes makes a huge difference. But yeah, it's an opportunity, and so I appreciate the opportunity to do that. Like I say, this show, for those that are new to the show or maybe new to the area, and it's a very informal. It's kind of a discussion type show. Nobody's claiming that anybody's right, although I am most of the time. No,
Wait, you're the star of the show.
No, I just pay.
Oh, yeah.
There's not a star. What I found is the thing.
That's where the star comes from.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because what I found is, and I've learned over the years, is that it's kind of one of these things that if you pay, then you can
make the rules.
You make the rules.
Yes.
And that works in finance sometimes.
Yeah.
And it works on the show too. So
I think so. Mostly in radio, it does work.
Yeah, I've had people ask me, "Oh, how'd you get to?" And I said, "Well, they let me pay them, and as a result, they give me an hour. I can do whatever I want."
Right.
So,
right.
So it's kind of fun.
And I have to monitor the equipment. And
yes,
it works out well.
Yeah, and it's a good idea for you to monitor it closely because there are occasionally
we never know.
Yeah, we never know what's going to happen.
Yes,
but
you see beads of sweat sometimes forming on my brow.
That's right. Well, so. But like I said, it's a show I've been doing for a while now, and it's kind of taken different directions from time to time. But it is a show that, like I say, it's fairly relaxed, and we encourage participation. If somebody wants to call, we just ask that you keep it civil. You don't have to agree with us because That's not
That
one
would
of
be
the requirements.
boring.
Yeah, that's not one of the
Yeah.
requirements.
Yeah.
But you can't swear at me on the radio because Frank can't blank you out, so
Yeah.
it's difficult. So,
Yes.
so it's just but everybody's entitled to their own opinion,
Yes.
even if they're wrong.
You can
Um,
swear at Mark off air.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
So, and it's funny because normally Mike is running the board, Mike Thomas is running the board.
Mhm. And he
So,
does a much better job, by the way.
well, he does, but and also probably more
I
people.
know this because you tell me this all the time.
Right, right.
Yes.
And that's also because more people will get through on him because he's more eager to let the opposite opinion go through than you are, Frank.
Yes.
So
Yes.
Frank will screen you out if he thinks you're giving something that we don't want to hear. He blames it all the time on the
Oh,
fact that he can't answer the
faulty
phone right, but
equipment, yeah.
faulty equipment.
Yeah.
But in reality, he's just shutting you down. But no, we welcome any kind of contribution or comment, and we'll talk about whatever issues you want to talk about. That's kind of the way it is. But in the meantime, uh, we try to talk about some of the things that are happening in the world, and maybe some of the things that you don't really realize what's going on, and what the impact is. And so, and as I've said on the show a number of times, um, we can politically want whatever outcome we want. That's our right from a political standpoint, and we can lobby for whatever outcome we want. Um, and and frankly, if we can get the government to intervene, then we can get them to do what we want. But that doesn't mean that we're going to get what we want. We might be able to get the government to do what we want, but it doesn't mean that we'll get what we want. And that's what we're talking about here a lot of times is that the economics of the transaction determine what you're going to get. Your wants can be whatever they are, and that tends to be more in the finance area. It sometimes tends to be more on the political side. I want free health care for everyone. I want free money for everyone. I want everybody to make $15 an hour or $20 an hour.
Free medical. Yes. Yeah. Free college.
Yeah. So all of
yeah.
those things we can want,
Mhm.
but economically, we can't have them unless the government intervenes. And when they do that, then that means we're going to get somewhere else. We're not going to get what we want. And we may not realize that, but that's what will happen. And it's because in a free market environment, and I've said this a number of times, I get really irritated about free market people uh, that say we can't disrupt the markets. We cannot, the government should stay out of business entirely. And I'll tell you, the fact of the matter is that they don't. They most of the time they should stay out of business.
Right.
But the government has to be involved in the business environment if we're talking about a monopoly, an oligopoly, or some sort of market where there is not a free market. We talk about the free market, but politically, we can say in the United States we have a free market. But overall, we do have a market that overall we have the ability to buy and sell, do things that we want. There's no government allocation of resources in general. But that doesn't mean that every aspect of the market is fair, and that every aspect of the market should be left alone. And
Like energy.
well, like anything,
Yeah.
there's health in the healthcare environment. We've got a lot of large insurance companies, so they dominate the market. And it's important to understand in economics. There's a term that you get into. That's called it's basically a fair price. A market price, fair price. Well, if you have a free and fair market with equal buyers and sellers, and that can be equal numbers or equal strengths on both sides. So you can have a small market that still has a price that's considered to be fair, if all the parties on the opposite sides are equal in strength. Okay, so you could have two players on one side and two players on the other side. And so there's only four people in the market in total. And you could have that. And as long as they both have opposing goals and have equal strength in the transaction, you can still get a fair price. But as soon as those four companies, realize that, that one or the other doesn't have a fair price, doesn't have a equal strength, then you've got to regulate that market. So what happens, and we see this all the time, is a company starts out as a free market company. It's one of a very small amount of businesses, and so or a large amount of businesses that are very small, and it doesn't have anything. It doesn't have anything that you would be required to regulate it. So let's talk a specific example. Let's talk about Amazon. Amazon was a bookstore, right?
Yeah.
It was a bookstore.
Yeah.
Basically an online bookstore, but it was a bookstore.
That's right.
That's what it was. And so it was, by no means was it big as Barnes and Noble, as any of the other bookstores at the time.
That's right.
But it became more and more successful. It expanded into areas that other places weren't in, and it became a major player in those areas. It's now a major player in the retail distribution market. The Walmarts and the Targets are all, they're its competitors. And frankly, as it's gotten bigger and more dominant, as the market gravitated towards this one supplier, they've now become a monopoly. There are certain things that you can't buy except buying it through Amazon.
Right.
And even the way they market for other companies on Amazon is skewed towards Amazon.
Right.
And then to top it all off, some of the other relationships that existed, for example, when Amazon originally started, it was online. It had to ship. It had to negotiate shipping contract. So it negotiates a shipping contract with FedEx or UPS or the post office, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how much control did they have? I mean, we're talking the post office versus this little small book distributor. None. They paid whatever the rate was. So now, their cost to deliver the product is going to be higher. So they're less competitive, let me put it this way. They're more closely aligned to the brick and mortar bookstore that, has higher volumes and has stuff in stock because of the shipping costs. And then Amazon also used to get away with not paying any sales tax, not collecting sales tax. So what they had is they had this little niche, but they were still pretty much in the same competitive environment. So that if I went into Barnes and Noble locally and bought a book, the cost of the book was probably going to be a little bit less potentially than if I bought it through Amazon and had to pay shipping costs. Okay.
Right.
But some people still did it because even though they were supposed to, they didn't pay sales tax because there was nobody collecting the sales tax, right?
Correct.
You still owed it. You were supposed to voluntarily send it in.
Yeah.
But nobody did that.
That's going to happen.
Right,
yeah.
right. So, but in some states they did. And in fact, in some states, and this is kind of interesting, it shows what happens. In some states, they've actually modified their state income tax form. And there's a provision in the bottom of it where you have to add the amount of purchases that you've made over the internet, so that they tax you on that. You pay on your income tax, you pay an additional amount for sales tax on online purchases, and you voluntarily put that number on. And if you don't put that number on, they automatically assume it's a certain amount based on your income or whatever. And so they automatically do that and charge you sales tax. So you have to designate what you actually bought online that you did not pay sales tax on. And so it actually modified some of the market to try to take that competitive advantage away, because I've got a 6% or in here 6.5% discount if I buy online and don't pay sales tax, even though I'm supposed to, right? So Barnes and Noble, they might have had the product for 1 or 2% less, but if I went there, I had to pay the sales tax.
Right.
So it cost me 5.5% more or whatever. So but over a period of time, Amazon got larger. They negotiated better contracts. This year, they negotiated a contract with with the postal service to get them to deliver on Saturdays and Sundays and every place else for their product. They entered into a contract. They had a contract with FedEx at one period of time.
Right.
And frankly, they're already big enough.
And they're building their own fleet, by the way.
Right, of drones. And
No.
well,
Delivery vehicle.
yeah, but they're going to do their own. They're going to do their own. They'll do their own delivery, but they're going to do. The bigger problem is getting them from location to location. So they're starting to do distribution centers, but at the same time, they've got these drone delivery systems, and they're big enough now that they could create their own fleet if they wanted to. They could replace FedEx for themselves.
Correct.
And they could do the same thing. And then they control exactly when the planes go and exactly where they go and how often they go and all kinds of things like that, which is kind of what United Parcel Service did with ground. They controlled all of aspects of it. Instead of sending it through the post office, you controlled when it was delivered, how it was delivered, how fast it was delivered. FedEx did the same thing with their FedEx Ground, and of course FedEx Overnight, FedEx Air was a huge changing point. Anytime those companies reached a point where they were just the sole competition, in that portion of it, you didn't have a fair and free market. And what happened is that if you didn't monitor it or do something about it, the competitors would go away.
Right.
And it became a monopoly. So FedEx, for example, and United Parcel to a large degree, they siphoned off all of the profitable business from the post office. The loss leader, which means that the business that you do only to get other business for the post office, was delivering a piece of mail to your house.
Yeah.
Okay. That business is not profitable. It's labor intensive. Getting it out to your house is intensive. Frankly, there's less of it because everybody does email or Facebook or whatever else.
Now it's just
so
advertising, circulars, flyers.
Right. Yeah. So there's less of that stuff. It's not profitable anymore. Not profitable enough to do it on Saturday and Sunday, but not profitable enough to do it at all. And the business that they hoped to get, the package delivery business, was taken up by UPS initially. The overnight business that they had hoped to get was taken up by FedEx. And so at this point, the post office, which we used to think of as this tremendous entity, and it was a monopoly and was fairly heavily regulated by the government, is now in a situation that it's still being regulated by the government, but it should be the other way around. It should be supported now because it is no longer a viable competitor. And if it's going to get back into the market, if you're going to create any kind of market in that delivery, you have to get more and more equal competitors. So now we got Amazon, which used to be a weak competitor versus FedEx and UPS. But now, as you pointed out, Frank, they're doing their own thing with drones and with delivery. And
Just
so now
put in an order for a bunch of electric vehicles, vans. Yeah,
that'll be there's their mistake. But anyway,
that's going to give them a financial disadvantage because instead of leaning on other people on a negotiated price, they're going to have a lot of fixed expenses now.
Well, they do, but at the same time, they're now so big that they can say to FedEx, "I don't need you."
Right.
And so the point being that in the economics world, no matter what you do, you have to monitor a market to determine that it's a free market, a fair market, and that you're getting an equilibrium price, which is deemed to be the fair price. And you have to recognize that markets change, and as they change, they may need to be regulated. And people cringe. You get some people on the libertarian right, like me, that as soon as we hear the government regulating, we cringe.
Right.
Because that usually is not a good thing.
I agree.
Yeah. But in economics, it is important to understand that sometimes that has to be done. There are not in markets, whatever those markets are, whether you're talking about markets like we were in the business industry with with Amazon and FedEx and all that, whether you're talking them, whether you're talking somebody like Facebook, who has become a sole purveyor of personal social media to a large degree, what kind of real competition do they have? You've got Twitter, maybe. You've got
Instagram.
Instagram.
Which don't they own Instagram too?
I think they have one of those too. Yeah. But the bottom line is, regardless of that, you've got very very few players.
Yeah.
So if, for example, let's say that Facebook decides that they don't want to have any political advertisements in Facebook from the right.
Ah, yeah.
All right.
Unilateral decision.
Yeah. Yes. And they can do that.
Yeah.
Because who's the competition?
They're
Where can I go?
Yeah.
Well, no, technically they are, and here's the difference. They're not privately held. They're a publicly traded company. And so, and there's the issue there is that when we have a market, a service, a product that becomes the sole market or product for certain types of services, you don't have a free market anymore. So if you allow, so you're never going to get a fair price. All right. You're never going to get a fair price. So if you don't regulate that market, then, or somehow find a way to get that market competitive by providing somebody out there as an alternative that has equal strength. It doesn't mean you have to have 100,000 people. But right now, what we've got is a situation where you've got a bunch of people that want to get their word out, and one source to do that in general. Because people are no longer reading the newspaper. People are no longer going online for some of these other things. The ads in the paper don't count anymore. There's not as many people on radio and TV. They're not doing that as much anymore. So the competitors out there are weak.
Yeah.
And Facebook is dominant in terms of getting the word out. Everybody wants social media. So, at that point, when Facebook first started, it didn't have that dominance. Nobody automatically ever, it wasn't a business. It was not a business vehicle at that point. In fact, if you had a business, you couldn't be on Facebook. It was supposed to be social media.
Correct.
And so it didn't have that kind of dominance. So there was no need to regulate it. It was on the opposite side of the equation. The services it had to buy, initially, how was Facebook ever going to make money? There was no, there was no subscription fee. Everybody joined for free.
Right.
So how did you make money on Facebook? Well, as with many, many, many online companies, the way you make money is not always selling a product. It is sometimes selling marketing, selling services and access. As soon as you become the sole player or one of two or three players in an industry that can provide access, you have to be regulated. Because
you're talking about metadata.
No, I'm just
I'm
not talking about that. I'm just talking about, I'm talking about the fact that you make your money off of getting the word out.
Okay.
There's a number of ways that can be done. Some is you can sell the social data and the like you're saying, the metadata. You can sell the information that people want so that they can tell, where you want to go, what you want to shop, where you've been, and all of those kind of things.
Right.
Yeah, there's that. But if you think about it, it's all about getting you to buy something or use something. It's all marketing. That's where they make their money. Many of these companies are large marketing agencies. They don't produce product. Even Amazon doesn't produce the product that they sell.
Right.
They're a distribution and advertising chain to get the word out there and get the money out there and get the delivery out there. Right.
And I would argue that their moneymaker is selling Amazon Prime. It's the credit card charging. So to sign up, you get the free shipping, quote, I use quotation air quotes, free shipping, but you have to give them $100 up front.
I don't. I pay $13. I pay $13.14 a month.
Well, that's because you have better credit rating.
I guess.
Yeah.
They just take it off my. No, that's bad. I think they charge it on my credit card. But
that's the point. I mean, they have access to your credit card, and automatically they just, can reach into your account and charge money for your membership in addition to whatever products and services that you purchase.
Yeah, I mean that was part of it. It was a membership organization, and it has a lot of people that pay that never use the benefits. You're kind of getting people to pay for shipping in advance that they think they might need and they don't. But the point though I was getting is that a lot of these companies over time change. Think about it right now, for example. There's been a lot of talk about regulating Twitter, Facebook, um, and uh, and because those are, you know, those are the primary
Mm,
media for other than very social. So, for example, Instagram is becoming more and more business oriented.
right.
So that's one of those kind of things. Snapchat is not really. It's, you know, it's still just kind of a communication tools. You know, to get stuff out there and make it go away.
And is that supposed to be like a competitor to the Chinese WeChat?
No, I don't think so.
No.
I don't know.
Uh,
It might be. I don't know. I'm
I
not
think
familiar.
WeChat's supposed to be like a combination of Snapchat and Facebook on the Chinese world.
You know, Snapchat I think was initially designed so that you could put something out there and it went away,
Oh,
so
okay.
that it didn't become permanent on the. So it wasn't really a chat; it was more a snap. You know,
So it had a short life.
it was yeah. The idea was that, you know, and the kids originally jumped on it because the idea was that you could put pictures out there from, you know, being drunk at a party or whatever,
Right.
and it was gone. It didn't permanently become. Which, as just as an interesting side note, because of the way these companies are and how they operate,
Those things,
nothing is ever gone.
no,
Nothing is ever gone. But
it's out there.
right.
Yeah.
So, but what I was getting at is, among these companies, you have these entities that right now control. If you think about it, if um, if Facebook were to ban certain things, like I said, you know, certain advertisements, political advertisements, or even business advertisements. Let's say that that Facebook said we're not going to allow anybody, we're not going to allow any advertisement or any conversations or discussion of fossil fuels. Well, you know, that would affect a lot of the free market discussion.
Right.
And here we are talking free market,
Mhm.
a lot of the interaction and discussion about fossil fuels, right? Because a lot of that is done. There's a lot of things that are now done on Facebook. So Facebook has to realize that once they get to the point that they're that dominant, then they're going to be faced with regulation. And the government has to realize that once any company gets that dominant, they have to be regulated, because you will not have a free market. You won't
Right.
have free prices. Um, you know,
And
it's
they're trying to also build themselves as a media company as well as
well, that's exactly. I mean,
yeah. I
that's
mean,
what it is.
so they're media. Are they media, or are they just a social communications device?
Oh well, they're
So
media. They now take advertisements. You know,
yeah,
they allow people to advertise on there. They
right.
allow businesses to advertise. They, you know, so it has become. They're definitely competing for advertising dollars.
Yes.
You know, they compete with all of the local and national
Hmm.
for that type of thing. So my point is that, you know, when we look at some of these kind of things, uh, you know, we have to be cognizant of the fact that markets do have to be regulated. There's no, you know, in the healthcare industry, when you've got four major players, um, and you know, in no competition in a local area, whatever else, you're not going to get a good price.
Yeah.
I mean, let's face it, in the state of Florida, Blue Cross Blue Shield is always more expensive because of the fact that they control Medicare management. They don't, it's not theirs, but they manage the system for Medicare collections and payments. So it's pretty hard for a doctor or a hospital that's dependent upon Medicare payments for their revenue to go to Blue Cross. We're not going to give you contracts to do other stuff. Now, you know, Blue Cross can't, because they're required to monitor the Medicare system. They cannot they cannot you know, say we won't provide you with services.
Hmm.
We can't. They can't lock out your Medicare services. But I can tell you what, if you have contracts with them, they can probably assure that your claims are processed faster because you have a contract with them, so they're already doing business with you on other things. If you have uh, if you are doing business with them and they're determining what's ordinary and customary, They probably have a better handle on some of the costs that are considered ordinary or customary in the real world. So, which probably gets you a higher reimbursement on the Medicare side. So, they become a player that becomes strong because of what they have and the other stuff they have. And so here in Martin County for years, we didn't have anybody else that could provide health insurance because it didn't include your doctor. You could have health insurance. You can get health insurance today cheaper than than Blue Cross, but you have to take somebody where you're probably not going to have your doctor. You're going to have a new doctor or some other doctor or somebody that's just starting who needs that kind of business. So you're going to get them, and you're going to have to figure out where you're going to go because up until recently, Martin Memorial wasn't necessarily going to take you. They didn't have your doctor didn't have privileges. So, so you were kind of stuck, so there's a lot of those kind of things that, that gave the insurance companies a monopoly. So now, and it wasn't an individual monopoly, but when you lock it into a few, I've said before, a lot of people, when the healthcare situation came out, and the Affordable Care Act came out.
You're talking about Obamacare, right?
Yeah, the Affordable Care Act. A lot of people couldn't understand why some of the major insurance companies were not fighting harder to avoid this, because it was obviously
they were getting the monopoly.
Right. That was the point. They were smart enough to realize that when the government manages a program like this, only a big company can be a provider.
Right.
Mom and pop isn't going to be able to provide insurance because the government isn't going to want to deal with that.
Right.
And so, and besides that,
it's just the reporting mechanism that would be unmanageable for a small company.
And the fact that also you're, from a practical standpoint, your pricing is going to be immediately. You can't, most companies are competing. A lot of companies in that industry, the small ones, were competing on service.
Right.
We will pay your claim. We will take care of your claim faster. We have more people that you can deal with. You'll get your doctor, all of those kind of things. Well, all of that made theirs a little bit more expensive. So now when you've got a search engine that the whole purpose of it really is to find the lowest cost provider, and you do that, and then you also find that the lowest cost provider also has some of your doctors. What about the little guy, that's just trying to build up their business? And they might be 5% higher or 3% higher or 10% higher. But maybe in the long run, they'll be more stable. And that's what the insurance companies knew. They knew that in the short run, they could force out those competitors. They could force out the small regionals. They could force out the locals, and they would be the ones that would be left. And then once they were left, here's where they were kind of stupid. They thought that they would be able to equally fight with and argue with the government, and they aren't.
No.
And that's why now some of them are now looking at the point that that they're saying, I'm out, I'm getting out, and the government's saying you can't get out. You're in it now. You have to be in it. Well, they can't make them be in it. And so their only alternative was to be out.
Yeah.
And so what that's done is reduce competition even further. And the only people that are left are the big guys.
Right.
So, it's kind of it's a difficult situation, but it is what happens when a market ceases to be competitive. Now, how do you fix that? You can regulate it out of existence. You can say there is no more Facebook. It's government owned.
Yeah.
You can say that there's government-owned Twitter. That's what, for example, the communist and socialist companies do. They take over the media.
Right.
It is important to control the message. They want to control the advertising. So they go out there and they control the media. And so they have national radio and national, television. You don't get the same services. You don't get free internet for everybody with access to anything. You don't get free cell phones for everybody with that, and low-cost cell phone service with access to everything. It gets blocked, it gets regulated, it gets controlled. Um, and that's because the government wants to get a message out and they don't want competition, right? It's the same thing in the U.S. If we allow certain things to become too powerful, then they end up getting controlled by the government, which in the long run is probably not a good thing because it reduces innovation, it reduces
Right.
competition and the ability to. So, in a regulated market, I guess that's another thing to make a comment about. In a market that's not a free market because it's an oligopoly, monopoly, or whatever, um, it has to be regulated. But because it's regulated does not mean you're still going to get
A free outcome.
a free outcome or a
Yeah.
fair price.
Yeah.
A fair price. You're going to get a dictated price. That price may seem to be low, but it may not be a fair price because the party on the other side of the contract, the entity that's being regulated, now doesn't have the ability to do research and development. They're not encouraged to find additional products or new products because there's no incentive for them to do that. They just keep the existing product. They get their existing money and they do it the way they've always done it. So, it's important that that you recognize that you don't get a fair price or a market price that's equilibrium. You get a regulated price, which is a manipulated price, which doesn't produce in the long run doesn't produce good value. So if the government's going to regulate a market, and they do need to regulate a market, various markets, the key is, do they regulate it so that it can become more competitive, or do they regulate it so that it's dictated? That's the concept behind single payer insurance, health insurance, and the concept of how you regulate healthcare. We definitely have to regulate healthcare costs. There's no question about that. For somebody that says we need to leave them all alone,
And let it find its own level.
it won't.
Yeah.
Because there are not enough insurance companies. So, and there are plenty of doctors. There's not as many hospitals. So you've got some disadvantage between doctors and hospitals. You've got some disadvantage between hospitals and insurance companies. You've got some big disadvantage between insurance companies and doctors. That's why many of the doctors are now owned by hospitals. So you've got a lot of situations where you don't have competition and you've got some problems. So the question is, what do you do? Well, if you dictate price and you allow the government through the insurance company or as the insurance company to dictate the services that will be covered and the prices that will be paid, that might result in a lower price to the consumer in the short run.
Right.
Which you may think then is, see, we got a fair price. But that's not the fair price, because at that level, you are forcing out of existence the competition on the other side.
Right.
So now, for example, a doctor says, I'm not going to operate on my own. I can't cover this.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go work for the hospital. So now all of a sudden you work for the hospital. Well, then eventually, because those contracts aren't high enough, the hospital says, well, I can't afford the staff I've got. I can't afford the research costs I'm doing here on drug research, new techniques, new surgeries, and all that, because I'm not getting reimbursed for it. It's considered, emerging technologies that the government's not going to reimburse me for, because they're not going to pay for that type of thing. So now all of a sudden I'm not going to learn how to do the LASIK surgery and the laser surgery and everything to fix somebody's eyes. I'm not going to learn how to do all of the robotic surgery that exists. All of that stuff came because some doctor or some hospital was paid enough money to make it worth their while to come up with a better way to do it. A safer, simpler,
better outcome,
mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
But if there's no money in the system to do that, they're not going to do that. Now, what also will happen is most of your doctors who have been in the system for a long time will retire. They'll get out.
Yeah.
And what will happen is their patients will be redistributed by the government through who they'll reimburse and how to someone else. And in most cases, that will be newer doctors who and maybe not even doctors who were educated in the US.
Right.
They may be doctors who come in from overseas
Right.
because they're the lowest cost provider right now. They need to develop their practice, they need to develop their market, and they don't have it. So if the government says to you, here, you know, we've got Dr. Dayton just retired, and we've got all of these women that are looking for a place, and so we're going to price wise dictate that we're not going to reimburse for for another doctor locally here who's been in practice, who's got an established practice and doesn't need that next patient, but would provide great service.
Mm-hmm.
No, 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 no. We're gonna reimburse at a level below that. And now what happens? Well, a new doctor comes in. Now, is that bad? Yeah, in the short run, let's face it. Dr. Dayton has years and years of experience, has seen tons of things. Somebody comes in, they've seen tons of books. They may have interned.
Right.
But that's not necessarily the person I want to go to if I have a problem that's probably not recognizable through normal testing or that needs to be changed. I want a Dr. Dayton who knows what they're doing.
Right.
He wouldn't treat me. Unfortunately, I'm the wrong sex.
Yes.
But anyway,
ironically, as you should mention him. He's the doctor from the H's practice initially. It was the three H's: Holder, Houston, and Harrell, and then he came in, and so he was just a fairly new doctor, and he delivered our last child from my first marriage, Scotty.
Yeah.
And so that was like 28 years ago.
Yeah. But like I said, they've got, and you know what? We saw that happen in the industry anyway. It was kind of funny that, that practices as the risks, this wasn't necessarily insurance, but it was, in effect, it was insurance, but it was more liability insurance. As more and more people were given the option of suing doctors with unlimited caps, the obstetrics portion of a practice became very risky because let's face it, if you have a child that the mother dies on birth,
right, or the baby's not perfect for whatever reason,
or or something like that, and actually the worst case scenario is typically where the child has some sort of injury that's going to affect them for the rest of their life. And of course, from a little bit of a sarcastic standpoint, that child was always going to be, LeBron James or somebody like that was going to be worth $300 million in their lifetime, right?
The highest, best.
Yes. They were going to be president of the United States or whatever they're going to be. And so they always, so now you start arguing about their earning capacity and, what value is, being taken out, and the tier factor. It's funny, just as a side note on that, when I was in public accounting years ago, up in Chicago, we had a hospital up there that we did the audit, and when I was with Arthur Anderson, and I had twice a year I had to audit. I had to be on an audit that was outside of my my division. My division was banking, and that's what I liked. So, but a couple times a year I had to go do something else, and usually it was in the regulated industries division, which meant utilities or hospitals, because they shared a floor with us and we shared personnel. So, or personnel director. So that's who I'd get assigned to. So I got assigned to the Norwegian American Hospital. The Norwegian American Hospital was not Norwegian, and most were not American. It was a neighborhood that had changed on the west side of Chicago, and as a result of the change, it had become poorer and more dedicated to Medicaid services. Right? Yeah. In those days, if you were stuck with Medicaid, there were no reimbursements. It took months for you to get reimbursement on Medicaid. So what happened is this hospital, its service was largely obstetrics, and it was mostly low income Medicaid, right? So they were operationally they were a decent hospital, although their reimbursement rate was slow, and because they were dependent upon Medicaid.
Mm.
And so sometimes they would make money, but it would take months for Medicaid to give them the cash to offset the work that they had done. So on paper, they were making a profit, but cash flow wise, they were going broke because they couldn't pay their bills.
Mm.
And then of course, in any audit you're doing, you're looking at the business's ability to continue.
Mm.
And because there was a question as to whether or not they would be able to have enough cash in the future, it also kept them from buying the latest and greatest and state of the art. It kept their staffing down because they couldn't afford to pay them. You know, when you miss your payroll to your nursing staff, some of them don't come back the next week. You know, they go somewhere else where the person's going to make payroll. So it was funny because we got in on this audit, and they had severe cash flow problems. Their chief financial officer had quit. Their administrator had quit. Part of that was because they hadn't been paid. And so
other than that, there were no problems.
Right.
Yeah.
So we were looking at them from what they call a going concern. Is, you know, we were going to give them a going, and if you give in an audit, if you give a going concern opinion in the old days, that they are not a going concern. So you have to state that. You have to restate their assets at liquidation value, which is substantially different than the asset value of an entity on an ongoing basis. There's no goodwill, for example. And you ended up having to write that entity. It was a kiss of death. They would be shut. Their doors would be shut almost instantly. Right. So going concern was tough. But we had a situation in there too, where there was two situations. One, the mother, who had been extremely obese, died during delivery. The anesthetic partly. So some of the question was whether the anesthetic was delivered correctly, but part of it's just her weight and heart. And anyway, she died. And you know, now what you had was a healthy baby, but no mother. So that one wasn't the big deal. The bigger deal is we had a situation where it was a man and a woman, husband and wife, from Mexico, and they were both here on green cards. They were not here, and the mom. It was again a tough delivery. There were some issues that happened. There were some health issues with the mom to start with. The mom delivered. She died on the table.
Wow.
And they dropped the baby.
Oh my God.
On its head. So it was obviously it was a screw up big time.
Right.
But their liability insurance had lapsed because they hadn't been able to make the payment because they hadn't had the cash flow. There was no lawsuit filed. So there was no lawsuit filed. So there's no liability out there, not even any potential. Nothing has been filed yet. But we actually qualified our opinion on that and gave a going concern. It was the first one that Anderson ever did, had a situation like that because of the potential lawsuit that was going to be filed. Because the dad took the baby back to Mexico. So initially people thought, well, okay. But before he left, he hired an attorney. And in those situations, because of that kind of care that exists in those kind of low paid situations in the hospital, the doctors would, the lawsuit would wait until the statute of limitations was almost up, because nobody that was there at the time would be left to testify what actually happened.
Got it.
And so now what you'd have is a baby with an injury, brain injury, a dad without a wife to help take care of that baby, and no money. So it's interesting, but that's kind of the things that end up happening when you get a control situation that, so in the short run, yeah, it was cheaper, but in the long run, that provider is no longer in existence. They're not going to do that business anymore. Anyway, so that's kind of really what I wanted to talk about this morning. Some of these things that we see and what the cause and effect of a regulated versus a non-regulated market is. But join us again next Wednesday right here on WSTU Digital 1450. We're Martin County's Heritage Station.